Oh, well, one of the hardest things about the book was actually writing the blurb for the back cover, because it's very hard to give a synopsis without giving too many spoilers, but I'll give it a try. Okay. So it starts off, there is a boy called Perry, an Aussie boy, who goes off on holidays to the south of France with his family. Now, this is not supposed to be the fantasy part of the book. I started writing it before COVID, when you could travel to the south of France. Anyway, so he's there, his mum's dragging him around museums and ancient ruins, and they go off to a festival, a Roman reenactment of a grape harvest, and he's poking around in an ancient Roman ruin near the festival, and suddenly he's transported back 1,700 years to Roman times. Now, he's the sort of kid who likes interesting experiences, so he thinks it's all great fun at first, but then he realizes he doesn't know how to get back to his own time. And he's been taken as a Roman slave. So he's not really having a great time after a while. He's eating the master's leftovers, like dormice and pigeons and snails. And he's not normally a kid who's adventurous with his eating. He likes his pizza, which of course he can't get in Roman times. So he makes friends. He's trying to make the most of it. He makes friends with another slave boy, Caratus, who's a mischievous red-haired boy, and with the master's daughter, who's a bit of a feisty girl. But he's, all the time desperately trying to find a way home. And then finally, he thinks he's worked out how to get home. But at that point in the story, he also realizes something rather tragic. Because while he was being taken around museums in his own time with his family, he saw the coffin of a child from Roman times. And he suddenly realizes that one of his new friends has the same name as the name of the child that he saw on that coffin. So now he has a terrible choice to make. Will he go home, or will he stay and try to save the life of this child that he's met? So this is like writing that part of the story for me was a really emotional experience, because I had worked up to that point and then I had to go through his emotions of making that choice. Well, it usually starts, in fact, I think it always starts with something true, something historical. I've always been fascinated by the past. So history is the start of my stories. Some little seed of some real thing that happened sometime in the past will be what starts me off. But then I also, as I'm working and as I'm doing drafts and things, I'm also always getting feedback from other, mostly from children. My sister, who is my collaborator this time in my book, is always my first reader. But then as soon as I start to do the writing and get to a point where I want to get proper feedback from my readers, I start reading the book in schools. And big reveal here, the book didn't actually start off as a time change book. It was originally just a straight historical novel about a girl who lived in ancient Roman times and her slave friend, Caratus. And when I first read this book at a school, a grade 5 class, actually Bialik, a couple of years ago, this is the version that I read to them. So this was part of the first chapter at that point. So there's the slave Caratus is climbing up inside a pigeon tower early in the morning. I wanted to set the scene for the villa that the story was taking place in. So he climbs up. It's almost daylight. It's just pre-dawn. He's climbing up in the dark of this pigeon tower, and then he looks out the tiny little windows at the top. It was almost pitch dark inside the tall, round pigeon tower, but it didn't bother Caratus. His hands scrabbled for the rungs of the ladder, and he swung himself upwards, bare fingers and toes curling round the smooth, worn wood. Skip down to the first light was showing in the sky when he reached the top of the ladder. Clambering on the centre platform, he peered out the high latticed window. The farm was just coming to life. Below him, he could see little Dubia staggering out the gate of the workyard with a bucket of barley and greens to feed the squawking chickens. And here came lanky Gobbio, his short tunic and bare legs streaked with dirt, heading for the dung heap to tip out the brown, smelly contents of a chamber pot. Now, I was expecting a reaction from this grade 5 class, and they think this is funny, yuck. I didn't get the reaction. I am used to kids getting so involved with my story, saying, oh, it's just like a film in our heads, you know, we can really see the scene. And they were saying, we like it, but we can't quite understand it. So the teacher started saying to them, well, you know, what's dung? What's a tunic? What's a chamber pot? What's a lattice? What's barley? They didn't know any of those words. So I was trying to bring to life this fun scene using words that they didn't know. So I don't write down to children. I'm used to using a few words here and there, but I hadn't realized how many in the very first page of the book I was throwing at them that were confusing them. So one little boy put his hand up. They were trying to be nice. And one kid put his hand up and said, oh, it reminds me of a time change book I've read. And I said, oh, does it? And I went home. Now, I've been working on this book already for 1.5 years. I've been researching it. I've been building up the story, plotting it, starting to write it. And I suddenly thought, you know what? A time change would work a lot better. Because then instead of throwing all the kids in the deep end with all these strange words and concepts they don't know, I could introduce it all through the eyes of a modern boy. So I rang up my sister who'd been collaborating with me, and I said, Tamara, we're scrapping a whole story that we've been working on for the last 1.5 years. We're starting again. And it's going to be a time change book. And she was a bit shocked, but that's how it came to be the new story. So I'll just, as a contrast, read to you the first page of the new book so you can see the complete difference now when you go into the book. So now the first page is, I'll need my glasses for the real book. Okay. I can't wear that, wailed Perry when his mother pulled his costume out of the suitcase. It's what Roman boys used to wear, she insisted, dropping it over his head. But Perry looked in the mirror and groaned. He was wearing a bright yellow dress that reached down to his knees with big red circles on the skirt and sleeves. Why couldn't I just be a soldier? He grumbled. Because we're going to a Roman grape harvest festival, not a battle reenactment, said Mum. I couldn't let you dress up as a legionary. Perry rolled his eyes. I copied a picture of a boy from late Roman times, Mum went on. It's authentic, yelled Perry and his big sister together, and they both started laughing. Authentic was Mum's favourite word because she couldn't just say correct like a normal person. And just as a little note, the word authentic was apparently challenging to kids too. So that's why I had to put in the explanation there about Mum using it. So you can see complete contrast there between what it was and what it is now. So then gradually I take the readers back into the past, but they see it all through this modern child's eyes and what he thinks of it, how he experiences it, how he sees it, and it has comparisons with modern things. So there aren't any words they can't understand. Thank you. Look, Tamara was, I've never worked with a collaborator before. She's always been my first reader, but having her working with me was fantastic in several ways. One was, of course, for the historical detail, because she's an archaeologist and a historian specializing in ancient Rome. So she was the ideal person to help me. But what was interesting for her was that she's always looked at history from very much from an archaeological point of view. And I started asking her questions that she'd never, in all her 30 or so years of being a historian in ancient Rome, had never thought about. Like when the characters go to a bathhouse, I wanted to know, well, how hot's the water in the bath, hot bath? And she had to try and research that, and all these sort of details of what it was actually like living in those days. But that was how she was so valuable to me, because I have to picture a scene in my head before I write it. And she provided me with the smells and then the things that the people might see, the real objects she found for me, examples of everything. And so I'd be writing a scene and, oh, what's that character going to wear? So she would rush around and find out what a person of that status in 300 CE in the south of Gaul would wear. You know, and then the names, you know, she found me the right sort of names. And we had, there's volumes and volumes of names that people have transcribed from anywhere, from any Roman monument, any gravestone, anything they've found, that they've written, put it all down in these huge volumes, like, you know, sets of encyclopedias of names, and where they were found, what sort of a status person they were. It's also names taken from potter's marks, from when potters have made roof tiles and things. So they we know are the low status ones, the slaves. So we burrowed through these books of lists of names, trying to find ones that were actually vaguely something that children would be able to pronounce. I thought Valentia was fairly easy, but they're all stumbling over the name Valentia. Caritas, I jumped on Caritas. As soon as I saw a possible slave name for Caritas, I immediately saw a kid with carrot-coloured hair. And so I incorporated him in the story. But then it turned out that ancient Roman carrots are not actually carrot coloured. You know, they're not orange. They were a pale yellow colour. So that became a funny part of the story where, you know, Perry is sort of laughing at him, oh, you know, carrot head, whatever, and Caritas doesn't know what he's talking about because his carrots aren't bright orange like that. So it was fantastic. So all sorts of ideas you know, came from this historical research, and Tamara was there on the end of the phone the whole time. I'd be texting her or ringing her, I need this, and she'd be finding it for me. But she also helped me with the weaving of the actual story, because it was quite complicated. You know, I had to sort of have echoes, things that happen in the present time that then get echoed in the past, and vice versa. You know, Perry might, you know, see something in the future that will then will mean something to him when he goes back in time. And I had to sort of build up the story, build up the tension. So there are all these complicated bits of plot that I was weaving together. So Tamara was sort of there, you know, checking you for me to make sure that, you know. And also another thing that happened with the changing the story, when I first offered it to the publisher, I'd actually written it from 3 points of view. So there was Perry's point of view, the modern boy. There was the slave boy's point of view, Caritas, and there was Valentia, the master's daughter's point of view. And I hopped from one point of view to the other in different chapters. And the publisher asked me to do the whole book from Perry's point of view. This is when I was halfway through the book. I'd written 20 chapters. And again, it was a big, start again. But I did it, and I agree with them. I think it is much better because you really get invested in Perry's point of view and his story all the way through. But that meant with all the chapters that I changed and all the plotting that I had made up to that point, I had to make sure that I hadn't made a mistake anywhere and slipped in someone else's or left a bit of someone else's point of view happening in the chapter. So Tamara was sort of helping me check through and make sure that everything was being seen through the right character's eyes all through the book. So yeah, it was great working with a collaborator. And it also, the other thing that she's done is she's always hated long paragraphs of description. So all my novels for the last 20 years, I've had to be careful, because she's my first reader, that there's no big lumps of boring description anywhere. So she has taught me to slip in the descriptions just here and there in a sentence, you know, just pop it in a bit, and, you know, so that that's why the books, my books have now become so, I think, easy to read and have all these little details in them, but without being big chunks of descriptions. That's her fault, or thanks to Tamara, that they're like that I weave in the historical bits and pieces without having them hit you in the face. I write what I want to read. And I'm actually still about 11 or 12 years old inside. So I write for myself mostly, and thinking about what I would want to read. And if other adults have also got a child still inside them. They enjoy it too. I really don't think a heck of a lot about the reader, except to make sure that the book is going to be fun for them to read, but not their age group so much. I write for what I like, what I find. I'm working on a sequel to the book now, and I'm having so much fun. I'm just, these characters are alive in my head, and I am just enjoying the story so much myself as I'm writing it. I'm laughing away, and I'm seeing these characters doing things, and the fun part is that although I plan the book a lot, and Tamara helps me with that too, when I'm actually sitting down to write it, all sorts of things happen that I had not planned, because the characters I don't start writing till I've been picturing the scene so long that it's alive and the characters are alive, and they just do all these things that I hadn't planned for them. And it's such fun, finding out what they're going to get up to. So I really enjoy it. And I think that's why, whether you're a kid or an adult, you can enjoy it too, because, I've had such fun writing it. And a couple of my last two books have really had echoes to adults, because the last one was the 52 Mondays, which was set in my own childhood times in the 1960s. And so many adults have related to that and said, oh, that brings back so many memories. And the one before that was The Family with Two Front Doors, which is about my grandmother, my nana's childhood in Lublin in Poland 100 years ago. And from a religious Jewish family. And people, of course, are interested in that lifestyle before the war, set in the 1920s. So it's before the war. It's a happy time. This big religious family. And so people have enjoyed that, whether they're Jewish or not. They've just enjoyed being able to read a Jewish story that's not a Holocaust story. It's just getting an insight into just a real fun, happy Jewish family life. So yeah, I just enjoy writing, and whoever wants to read it can read it. Well, the funny thing is that I don't actually know where gratitude comes in as a theme in the book. I think what might be happening is that readers might be feeling gratitude when they're reading it, because of the revolting lifestyle that Perry is going through, and they're thinking a little bit about COVID and whatever. I wrote the book and planned it all, got most of it written before COVID hit. So I was finishing it during COVID, but COVID was nowhere in my head or in the world, when I was writing it. But I was writing about a pretty revolting world. I don't even go into the really horrible parts of Roman life with the gladiators killing each other and slaves being thrashed and all that. I've because it's a book for children, and I guess I do in some ways then do respect children might be reading my books. But I have focused on fun aspects as much as I can. But then there's also the funny aspects, like the toilets, things like, that they sat along in a shared toilet, all in a row, men and women, boys and girls, and they didn't have toilet paper. They wiped their bottoms with a sponge on a stick, which they also shared. So, that's one of the most horrible things for Perry when he first goes back and he wants to go to the toilet. You don't normally put going to the toilet in a book, but I couldn't avoid, I had to include that. So we've got, these ghastly foods that they eat and all sorts of things in the story that people would be reading it and thinking, oh, never mind COVID, I'm glad that I live in modern times, I think. So there may be a bit of gratitude happening with the reader there that they don't have to live in Roman times. Well, they're all nearly all based on real people. Perry is actually Tamara, my sister's son, so he's my nephew. And yeah, he let me use him for my character. So I had to get him checking everything that happened. He's now 23, but when he was 11 years old, like Perry in the story, he actually really did travel to France with his family. And I've really got photos of him at that age in the Museum of Arles, which is in the story. And he's actually standing in front of an old Roman coffin in that photograph. So, you know, he's really that boy in the book. His real name's Lucas. And he also actually studied Latin right through to university. So he helped with the Latin words in the book as well. So he's very much a real person, and you know, he has an interest in maths. So the boy in the story has an interest in numbers and things, and he's also a very positive person, the real Lucas. So yeah. Then there's Caritas, the slave boy. He's a mischievous boy. Now he's inspired by one of my grandsons, who's a very naughty little boy. Or actually, he used to be. When he was about 2, when I was writing the story, he was a very, very mischievous boy. He's now turned into an absolute angel. So I'm going to have to try and remember what he used to be like for my sequel, because I can't use him anymore. And then there's Valentia, the master's daughter. Now, she's probably a mixture of me and my granddaughter. She has a pet cat, and that's because my granddaughter loves cats. And she asked me, Nana, when you do your next book, can you put a cat in it, please? So because I do everything my grandchildren ask me to, I put a cat in the story. And that cat actually ends up being one of the main characters, and a critical character. In fact, at one point, the title of the book was almost going to be All Because of the Cat. So thank you to my granddaughter for suggesting that. But what was really interesting in developing Valentia's character, as a master's daughter, although she was, you know, sort of high status, she was from Roman times. So she could boss her slaves around, but she had to be very respectful of her parents, not like a modern child. So there were scenes that I wrote in the book where Tamara had to keep reminding me, hang on, she couldn't ask her father for that. Now, a modern kid, if they really wanted something, would say, oh, Dad, can I have this? Or I want that, and can we do that? She couldn't do that, which made it very challenging for me as a writer to have to keep that in mind. The interesting thing was, apparently the Romans didn't even have a word for please. So, you know, you'd have to say, oh, I wish something or other, or, you know, you have to get, I don't know how you know, that was, I suppose you didn't say please to your slaves and things, you know, so you didn't say please. So it was really interesting. She was the hardest character to write, because although I knew how she would feel and think and want, she had to behave like an ancient Roman girl, not like a modern girl of 11. So yeah, that was a challenge.